You want a real story, all right. Then listen close because this isn't some fairy tale about second chances. It's about the kind of betrayal that tears your soul in half while the world keeps spinning like nothing happened. I lost 40 years of my life to a woman who smiled at me in the morning and lied to me by night. And yet, I'm still here, still breathing, still standing. If you're hearing my voice right now, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you are listening from and maybe whether you've ever faced a betrayal you thought you'd never survive. Because tonight, my friend, I'll tell you how I lost everything and found something even greater in return. You can spend 40 years learning how to read people and still miss the one face that matters most. That's what I learned the hard way. My name's Samuel Carter, and I'm 60 years old. I live alone now, in a quiet neighborhood, just outside Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind of place where the loudest thing you hear after sundown is a train passing somewhere far off in the dark. I used to think that kind of silence meant peace. These days it just means you've run out of things worth saying. I worked for the Tennessee Highway Patrol most of my life, 35 years in uniform, 10 more behind a desk teaching rookies how to stay alive. I wore the badge with pride. I believed in the system, in right and wrong, in the simple idea that if you did your duty and loved your family, the world would treat you fair in return. Turns out, life doesn't make those kinds of deals. These mornings, I wake up before sunrise just out of habit. Old habits die harder than bad marriages. I make a pot of strong coffee, pour it into the same chipped mug I've had since '85, and sit by the kitchen window. The view's nothing fancy, just a strip of cracked asphalt, a mailbox leaning slightly to the left, and a sky that turns pink over the Smokies. But it's mine. I like watching the world start moving while mine stands still. Sometimes I see couples walking their dogs together, laughing about something that probably won't matter tomorrow. And I wonder when laughter stopped sounding like comfort and started sounding like a memory. I wasn't always this quiet. I grew up in the hills of East Tennessee, the son of a railroad man and a nurse. My daddy, Frank Carter, worked the rails for Southern Pacific, a hard man who believed in order and early mornings. My mama, June, had the kind of heart you don't see anymore. Steady hands, quick smile, never complained, even when she had to patch up half the town for free. We weren't rich, not by any stretch, but we had what we needed: biscuits, love, and a porch swing that creaked in rhythm with our lives. Daddy taught me the value of work. Mama taught me the value of mercy. Between them, I figured out who I wanted to be: a man who served, a man who stood for something. In the summer of 1980, I put on my first uniform. The fabric itched like hell, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw purpose. Back then, all I wanted was to make my old man proud. He didn't say much that day, just shook my hand and said, "Don't ever let that badge shine brighter than your name." I carried those words longer than he carried his own breath. He died a year later, sudden heart attack. I was 22, still too young to understand that time doesn't ask for permission. I buried him with his old pocket watch in his hand. Since then, I've been obsessed with time, how it slips, how it steals, how it never gives anything back. When I talk about my life now, folks say it sounds lonely. But I don't think of it that way. Loneliness is when you don't have anyone. What I feel is the echo of someone who used to be there. After retirement, I told myself I'd rest. Maybe take a trip down to the Gulf, fish a little, fix the leaky roof that's been bothering me since Bush was president. But rest has a funny way of feeling like punishment when you've lived on adrenaline your whole life. I didn't know what to do with quiet. I still don't. So I took a part-time job back at the station, helping train new recruits. Kids half my age, with phones glued to their hands and no idea how to talk to a grieving mother. I try to teach them respect for the uniform, for the people, for themselves. Some listen, most don't. But it gives my dies a shape, and at my age, that's enough. I keep a picture of my family on the desk there. Elaine, my wife. David, our boy, now an officer himself. And Laura, our daughter, a doctor down in Nashville. The photo was taken 12 years ago, before the cracks started to show. Before the house got too quiet. Before I learned what loyalty really costs. Elaine used to say, I was married to the badge. Maybe she was right. I missed birthdays, anniversaries. School recitals always had a case or a call that couldn't wait. But I believed I was building something solid, a foundation strong enough to last a lifetime. I believed wrong. If you ask me now, what happened? I'll tell you this. It didn't fall apart all at once. It was slow, like rust on steel. One missed dinner at a time. One silent drive home. One moment when she reached for her phone instead of my hand. Funny how a man who spent his life catching lice couldn't see the one living under his own roof. You know, I used to think betrayal looked like a knife or a bullet, something fast, violent, final. But it's quieter than that. It's a soft voice saying, I'm fine, when she's already gone. It's perfume that doesn't belong to you. It's laughter from another room when you thought you were alone. I thought I knew what loyalty meant, until I didn't. People say the hardest part of aging is your body giving up. That's not true. The hardest part is realizing the memories hurt more than the wounds ever did. These days I keep myself busy. The apartment's clean, the bills are paid, and the porch light still works. I talk to my son once a week, see my daughter every few months. They think I'm doing fine, and maybe that's true. You learn to make peace with solitude the way you once made peace with chaos. But some nights, when the wind rattles the screen door and the train whistles down the tracks, I still hear her voice in that old kitchen, laughing at something I said. And I remember what it felt like to believe I was loved. There's a scar on the inside of my hand, where my wedding ring used to be. I took it off, the night everything changed. That's the story I'm about to tell you, the story of how a man like me, who spent a lifetime serving truth, got blindsided by it in his own home. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about what comes after the quiet, the reckoning, the part where you learn who you really are when everything you built burns down. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, friend. What I'm about to tell you, it isn't pretty, but it's real. Because the man I used to be died the day I discovered what she'd done. And the man who's talking to you right now, he's still trying to understand how love can turn into something you have to survive. That's the story of the betrayal that changed everything. The year was 1987, and Knoxville was sweating under one of those southern summers that could melt your patience clean off your bones. I was 30 years old, a highway patrol officer with a fresh promotion, and an apartment that smelled like burnt coffee and gun oil. My whole life revolved around the job shifts, reports, patrols. I thought that was enough. It wasn't. That July, the town held its annual River County Fair, a mess of fried food, country bands, and laughter that carried past midnight. I wasn't much for crowds back then, but one of my buddies from the precinct insisted I come. Said I needed to remember what normal people look like. That's where I saw Elaine Parker for the first time. She was standing under the yellow lights of a funnel cake stand, laughing at something a student had said. She taught English at the local high school, young, confident, the kind of woman who carried sunlight around like it was stitched to her dress. Her hair caught the fairground lights and turned gold. I remember thinking, well, hell, there goes my quiet life. I walked up still in uniform, because back then I wore it everywhere, like armor. She looked me up and down with that playful, assessing look women give men. They're not sure they want to encourage yet. You're one of those highway boys, aren't you? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I said, trying to sound casual, but probably looking like a deer in headlights. Samuel Carter. I'm Elaine, she said, extending a hand sticky with powdered sugar. I shook it anyway. We ended up talking for hours beside the Ferris wheel. She told me about her classroom full of wild teenagers who thought Shakespeare was a curse word. I told her about my beat on Highway 75, about pulling over drunks and dreamers alike. She listened, not the polite kind of listening people do when they're waiting for their turn to speak, but real listening, the kind that makes you forget how tired you are. When the fair started closing, I offered her a ride home. She laughed, said she lived only 2 blocks away, but she let me walk her there anyway. Before she went inside, she said, "You don't smile much, Officer Carter. You should fix that." That line stayed with me. I called her 2 days later. She answered on the second ring. "I wondered if you'd chicken out," she teased. We had our first date at Maggie's Diner, a little place that smelled like bacon grease and nostalgia. She ordered sweet tea extra lemon. I ordered black coffee, because that's what cops are supposed to do. She told me she'd moved to Knoxville from Memphis after college chasing independence. I told her I'd been chasing discipline my whole life. Maybe that's why we fit. We met in the middle between freedom and duty. By spring of 1988, we were inseparable. Elaine had this way of softening the edges of my world. My apartment went from a lonely man's quarters to something that smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. She brought color into rooms that had only known gray. We got married the next summer in a small Baptist church on Cedar Hill. No big crowd, no fancy suit, just our families, a few friends, and a preacher with a crooked tie. I remember her walking down the aisle in a simple ivory dress, no veil, just flowers in her hair. She smiled at me like she knew something I didn't. Maybe she did. After the ceremony, my mother pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't ever let her forget why she fell in love with you." I told her I wouldn't. At the time, I believed that. We bought a small house on Maplewood Street. Nothing grand, but it had a porch and a yard big enough for dreams. Elaine painted the kitchen yellow, said it made the mornings brighter. I planted a magnolia tree out front. She said it reminded her of home. Our first child, David, came along in 1990. I was on night shifts, then working overtime to afford the crib and the hospital bills. When I held him for the first time, tiny fingers gripping my thumb, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about duty. I was thinking about legacy. 3 years later, we had Laura, and our family felt complete. Elaine was radiant as a mother, patient, protective, maybe a little too forgiving. She read bedtime stories while I stood in the doorway, half in uniform, half in another world. We didn't have much. My paycheck barely covered the mortgage, and Elaine's teacher's salary filled in the gaps. But it didn't matter. We laughed. We argued about small things. We made peace before sleeping. I used to say, we never had much, but we always had enough. Those were good years. The kind that lull you into believing they'll last forever. I remember coming home one evening after a 12-hour shift. I was covered in dust, smelling of gasoline and asphalt. The kids were already in bed. Elaine was sitting by the window grading papers, a soft lamp behind her. I leaned down, kissed her hair, and said, "I'm sorry I missed dinner." She smiled without looking up. "You always miss dinner, Sam. It's part of the job, right?" She didn't say it with anger, not yet. It was more like resignation, the first quiet sigh of a storm still far away. Over time, I started measuring my life by the things I missed: birthdays, recitals, anniversaries. I thought working harder would make it up to them. I thought providing was the same as loving. It's strange looking back, how easily devotion turns into distance. Elaine began taking night classes, said she wanted to keep her mind active. I was proud of her, though. A part of me wondered what she needed to escape from. I'd come home to empty rooms, the faint smell of her perfume hanging in the air, a dinner plate covered with foil, waiting on the counter. Still, every Sunday morning, we sat side by side in the same church pew. People called us a model couple. Maybe we looked that way from the outside, two grown-ups who had it all figured out. But I was starting to feel something hollow underneath it. One night after the kids were asleep, she said softly, "Sam, do you ever feel like life's just passing us by?" I laughed it off. "You mean, are we getting old?" "Sure." She shook her head. "No, not old. Just stuck." I told her she was overthinking it. That's what I always said. But that night, lying in bed, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed the way she used to at the county fair. The truth is, I thought love was a duty. You show up. You stay faithful. You pay the bills. You protect what's yours. But love is more than showing up. It's seeing. And somewhere between the patrol car and the paychecks, I stopped seeing her. That's how it starts, not with shouting, but with silence. Not with betrayal, but with neglect. I didn't know it then, but the woman who once made me feel alive was already learning how to live without me. If I had to describe the next 20 years of my life, I'd call them steady. Not happy, not sad, just steady, like a river that looks calm on the surface but hides a current underneath. After we married, time started to move differently. The days folded into each other, work, dinner bills, sleep, repeat. We built a life out of ordinary things, coffee pots, grocery lists, Saturday chores. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. By the late 1990s, I'd climbed to sergeant with the highway patrol. My name carried weight at the station. The rookies looked at me like I was carved out of granite. I trained them hard, demanded discipline, and I didn't tolerate excuses. There's pride in that. You know, being the kind of man others rely on. At home, Elaine was making her own climb. She'd become head of the English department at Westbrook High, known for her sharp mind and her ability to turn the roughest kids into writers. She loved her work maybe more than she loved anything else. I respected that about her. Our kids, David and Laura, grew up faster than I could blink. David inherited my quiet side. Always serious, always chasing approval he already had. Laura was Elaine's mirror, bright, talkative, full of questions I didn't always know how to answer. The years blurred. Every promotion I got, I told myself it was for them, for a better life, a bigger safety net, a stronger name. When I left for work before sunrise and came back long after dinner, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought dedication was the same as love. I missed a lot. First steps, school plays, anniversaries. Elaine used to leave me notes on the fridge, short, simple ones. Dinner in the oven, or kids already asleep. Be safe. Eventually, even those stopped appearing. We still had our routines. Sunday mornings at church, barbecues in the summer, vacations to Myrtle Beach when we could afford them. On the surface, we looked like the picture of stability, but something had shifted, something I couldn't name yet. Elaine started to laugh less. Not that she was unhappy exactly, just quieter. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd smile and say, "Nothing, Sam. You worry too much." So I stopped asking. There's a certain blindness that comes with routine. You start mistaking familiarity for closeness. I figured as long as we weren't fighting, things were fine. I was wrong about that. I remember one night vividly. It must have been 2005, maybe 2006. I was late again. There had been an accident out on I-40, a pileup that kept me at the scene until nearly midnight. By the time I drove home, the radio had gone to static, and the city lights felt 1,000 miles away. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark except for the kitchen light. Elaine was sitting at the table, her head resting on her folded arms, a plate of food cold beside her. She'd fallen asleep waiting for me. I stood there for a long time, just watching her. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room. Her hair had more silver in it than I remembered. Her hand, the one I used to hold every evening, now looked fragile somehow. I wanted to wake her to say something. I'm sorry I miss you. I still see you. But I didn't. I just turned off the light, kissed the top of her head, and went to shower the day off me. That moment should have scared me. Instead, I told myself it was normal. We were both just tired, busy grown. Love changes, right? That's what people say. Years rolled on. David joined the army following in my footsteps in his own way. Laura went to med school, making Elaine beam with pride. The house grew quieter. Meals shrank from 4 plates to 2. Then some nights just 1. Elaine started joining her colleagues for book club evenings. I never questioned it. She deserved time with her friends, I thought. After all, I was gone enough myself. But I noticed she dressed differently, nicer clothes, a little more makeup. I didn't mention it. Maybe I didn't want to. One Sunday after church, as we were driving home, Elaine said softly, "Do you ever feel like you blinked and life just slipped past us?" I laughed, thinking she was being dramatic. "We've done fine, Elle. The kids are good, the bills are paid. That's what matters." She turned to look out the window. "Maybe to you." We didn't talk much after that. The silences grew longer, heavier. The house felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I kept telling myself we were just entering a new phase, empty nesters adjusting to quiet. But there's a difference between peace and absence. I just didn't know it yet. Sometimes I'd come home from work and hear her humming in the kitchen, and for a split second, it felt like the old days. Then she'd stop, and the silence would swallow it whole. I started taking extra shifts, not for money, but because I didn't know what to do with myself at home. The station made sense. The world outside those walls didn't. There were small warning signs I ignored. The way she stopped waiting up for me. The way she'd turn her phone face down when I walked into the room. The way she smiled politely when I kissed her cheek, as if returning a favor rather than a feeling. I thought maybe I'd become boring, old, predictable. So I tried flowers, dinner out, weekend trips. But love isn't a fire you can relight with gasoline. It either breathes on its own or it doesn't. We weren't arguing. We weren't breaking. We were simply fighting. Looking back, that was the cruelest part. You don't hear distance approaching, it just moves in, rearranges the furniture. And one day you realize you're living beside a stranger who knows all your habits, but none of your heart. People think betrayal starts with lies. It doesn't. It starts with silence. And I, stubborn, disciplined, proud, mistook that silence for peace. I thought, if I just kept steady, kept doing my part, the river of our life would keep flowing the same way it always had. I was wrong. Because silence isn't peace. Silence is the beginning of distance. By 2016, I was 60 years old and technically retired, though I still wore the badge a few hours a day. The department offered me a part-time administrative role, paperwork, recruit evaluations, mentoring the kids who thought courage came from caffeine and tattoos. It wasn't much, but it gave my days a backbone. Routine has a way of keeping old men from falling apart. Elaine, on the other hand, had just stepped away from teaching. 30 years in the classroom had left her burnt out, she said. "I just need to find myself again," she told me one morning over coffee. Her tone was calm, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed the line. I nodded, pretending to understand. Truth is, I didn't know what that meant. Find herself, I thought we'd already built a life together. I told her she deserved the rest, maybe even a little adventure. But the way she smiled, distant, polite, made something cold stir in my chest. The first few weeks after she retired, things seemed normal enough. She joined a local ladies group, started going to art shows, yoga classes, little get-togethers I wasn't invited to. I figured that was fine. She'd earned her freedom. After all, I'd had mine for decades on the open road in the patrol car, chasing chaos. Maybe it was her turn. But then came the details. A new bottle of expensive perfume appeared on her dresser, something floral foreign, not her usual scent. A half-empty wine glass would greet me on the counter when I got home from work. Elaine never used to drink alone. Her phone started buzzing late at night, and she'd pick it up, sighing faintly, turning away as she typed back. I told myself not to read into it. She had friends. Everyone texts. But the doubt, it crept in, quiet and corrosive. One Thursday afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. I'd left the station after finishing reports, knee aching from an old training injury. The house was spotless, candles burning in the living room, and there it was, an unmistakable scent, rich and heavy men's cologne. Not the cheap kind. Something bold, musky, foreign. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just breathing it in, that smell, stabbing through the air like a memory I didn't own. Elaine came down the hall a few minutes later, startled to see me. "Sam, you're home early," she said, her voice too light, too quick. "My knee's acting up," I said. "Did we have company?" Her eyes flickered just for a second. "Oh no, I burned a candle earlier. Maybe that's what you're smelling. But candles don't smell like cologne." She busied herself with the dishes, her movements a little too fast, a little too rehearsed. I wanted to ask more, but my pride got in the way. After all, what kind of man suspects his own wife? After 40 years, the next week, the wine glasses appeared again. 2 of them. I picked one up. It still had lipstick on the rim. The other had none. When I asked, she said Laura stopped by. "You just missed her." Laura hadn't been in Knoxville for weeks. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly above us, wondering when the air in our home had started feeling so foreign. A few days later, I was out watering the yard when Mary Lou, our neighbor from 2 doors down, waved from her porch. She was the kind of woman who knew everything that happened on the street before it even happened. "Morning, Sam," she called out. "Everything all right?" "Can't complain," I said, forcing a smile. She leaned on her railing, eyes narrowing, like she was about to drop a bomb. "Say, that black Mercedes that's been pulling into your driveway lately, that ain't yours, right?" I froze. "What Mercedes?" "Oh, honey, I've seen it a few times now. Real fancy one. Tinted windows. Comes around mid-afternoon, right about the time you're gone. Leaves before dinner." Thought maybe Elaine had a friend visiting. My throat went dry. I mumbled something about probably being a delivery mix-y up, but I could feel my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. That night, I asked Elaine casually, "Anyone stop by today?" She didn't even blink. "Just the girls from the club." "Why?" "No reason," I said. But her answer landed like a stone sinking in water, heavy, silent, final. I tried to shake it off, but the image of that black Mercedes wouldn't leave my mind. The next few days, every time I saw headlights flash across the curtains, my stomach knotted. Every sound outside made me listen closer. And still I told myself it was nothing. I was being paranoid. Maybe Mary Lou had seen the wrong car. Maybe Elaine's perfume was a gift. Maybe those wine glasses were for the neighbors. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, something inside me was changing. The trust I'd worn like armor for decades was beginning to crack. One night, I watched her sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, smiling at something she didn't share. She caught me looking and said, "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired," I lied. She nodded and went back to her screen. I studied her face in the glow of that little device, the woman I'd loved for most of my life, sitting 10 feet away, feeling like a stranger. Later that evening, when she fell asleep, I walked out to the porch. The street was dark, the night thick and heavy. The magnolia tree I'd planted decades ago rustled in the wind. Across the yard, Mary Lou's porch light flicked off. I stood there a long time, hands gripping the railing, trying to decide whether I wanted the truth or whether ignorance was easier. My father used to tell me, "Trust, son, but trust like a man who locks his doors at night." That line came back to me as the moonlight hit the driveway, and I knew what I had to do. Trust but verify. I'd spent my whole life preaching about honor on the job, in church, with my kids. You don't spy on the people you love. That's what I used to say. But the night I ordered those hidden cameras, I crossed a line I swore I never would. I told myself it wasn't out of jealousy or paranoia. It was about truth. I just needed to know. It took me 2 days to get the equipment, a set of tiny motion-activated cameras, small enough to hide in picture frames and vents. I waited until Elaine went to her book club that Thursday afternoon, and then I installed them, one in the living room, another in the kitchen, a third watching the hallway. The last one, the hardest, went in the bedroom. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I stood in the doorway afterward, staring at our bed. That bed had held our laughter, our children, our entire marriage. Now it held a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. When I finished setting up, I sat in my truck out front, phone connected to the live feed. For the first hour, nothing happened. The house empty, quiet, as a confession booth. Then at 2:37 p.m., a shadow moved across the living room camera. The front door opened. Elaine stepped in, hair done, makeup perfect, wearing the red sweater I'd bought her for our 30th anniversary. She looked young again, nervous, but glowing. Then another figure appeared behind her. Richard Harlan. The name hit me like a slap. He was my old partner from the patrol, retired 5 years earlier, after a heart attack took him off the field. We'd served together for nearly 2 decades, shared meals, beers, war stories. He'd been at our wedding. He'd bounced David on his knee when the boy was just a baby. And now, he was standing in my living room. I watched through that little screen as Elaine turned to him, smiling the way she hadn't smiled at me in years. "You sure he's not coming home early?" Richard asked, his voice deeper, slower than I remembered. "No," she said softly. "Sam's at the station until 6. He chuckled. Same old Sam. Predictable as clockwork. She laughed, a sound that twisted something inside me. They walked to the kitchen. He pulled a bottle of wine from his coat. Cabernet, 2012. I recognized it, an expensive vintage I'd once given Richard when he retired. He'd kept it all these years. For this. They poured 2 glasses. She leaned on the counter, looking up at him. "You've lost weight," she said. "And you," he replied, "haven't aged a day." I turned up the volume, but their voices were soft, intimate. I didn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. The way they looked at each other told me enough. I watched Richard brush a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Their hands lingered together, familiar and unashamed. He said something that made her laugh, and she touched his arm lightly, tenderly. It wasn't passion that broke me. It was ease. Like 2 people who'd been doing this a long time, who didn't need words anymore. The camera caught every movement, his jacket falling on the sofa, her hand resting on his shoulder, the faint smile that used to belong to me. I turned off the sound. I couldn't bear to hear her voice. For a few minutes, I just sat there in the truck, staring at my reflection on the dark phone screen. The man looking back at me didn't look like a cop, or a husband, or even a man. Just a ghost realizing he'd spent his life guarding the wrong door. When I finally looked again, the image showed them sitting together on the couch, glasses empty, her head resting against his chest. His hand brushed her hair the same way I used to do when she had migraines. That's when it hit me. The war I fought wasn't out there on the highways or in the alleys or with criminals. The war had been inside my own home. Every night I thought I was keeping my family safe. I was blind to the enemy sharing my dinner table. I didn't cry. Not yet. Men like me don't cry when we break. We go quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the air heavy. I sat there until the sun went down, until my phone battery died, until I couldn't hear anything but my heartbeat in my ears. When I finally went inside the house, smelled of lavender cleaner and stale wine. Elaine was already asleep. She stirred when I entered but didn't wake. I stood at the foot of the bed, watching her breathe, wondering how many times she'd lain there next to me. Body warm, heart elsewhere. In the faint light, I noticed Richard's coat, a dark wool jacket, hanging over the chair in the corner. She must have missed it when she cleaned up. I reached into the pocket without thinking. My fingers brushed a folded note, faint traces of her handwriting, visible even in the dim light. Next Tuesday, same time. Miss you already. I slipped the note back, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. I stepped out onto the porch, sat down and watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one. Across the road, Mary Lou's curtains twitched. The world kept turning, like nothing had changed. But everything had. My badge couldn't help me. My rank meant nothing. I'd spent my life protecting strangers from betrayal, and I couldn't even see my own. That night I made a decision. Tomorrow I wouldn't watch another screen. I wouldn't hide behind cameras or doubt. Tomorrow I'd face it. I'd look my wife in the eye and ask her the question I already knew the answer to. Because some truths, no matter how much they hurt, deserve to be spoken out loud. That night felt colder than it should have. Even in late May, Knoxville air carries a damp warmth, but when I pulled into the driveway around 9, the house looked frozen in place, still silent, guilty. The porch light flickered like it didn't want to witness what was about to happen. I sat in the truck for a while, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. There's a strange calm that comes before a storm, the kind that's almost merciful. You know something's about to shatter, but you've already accepted the sound it'll make. When I finally stepped inside, Elaine was pacing in the living room, wearing the same red sweater she'd worn that afternoon, the same one from the recording. "Oh, Sam," she gasped when she saw me. "You're home late." I was worried. I shut the door quietly. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Elaine." Her smile faltered. "Pretend what?" "The book club. The errands. The candles that smell like another man's skin." She froze, one hand still on the arm of the sofa. "Sam, I don't know what you're—" "Don't," I said, my voice low. "Don't make me listen to another lie tonight." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old wall clock. Then slowly, she sank into the chair across from me, eyes darting toward the floor. "How much do you know?" "Enough," I said. "His name's Richard." The way she flinched told me I didn't need to say more. "How long?" I asked. She swallowed hard. 2 years. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. 2 years. 700 days of pretending. "Why him?" I asked quietly. "Of all people, why Richard?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't look at me. "Because he saw me, Sam. Because he listened when I talked. Because for years you've been somewhere else, even when you were sitting right beside me." I felt something inside me twist. "So you cheated because I worked too much?" "It wasn't about work," she snapped, then softened. "You stopped seeing me. I was invisible in my own home. I tried to tell you, but you were always gone. If not at the station, then inside your own head. I got tired of feeling like a ghost." Her words were knives, but what hurt most was knowing part of it was true. Still, Truth doesn't excuse betrayal. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us. One tap, and the screen lit up with the paused frame of her and Richard, his hand on her shoulder, her smile warm and familiar. The color drained from her face. What is that? You tell me. She stared, trembling lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Then barely a whisper, You filmed us. I had to know, I said. I couldn't keep guessing. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She pressed her hands to her mouth, eyes wide, tears spilling fast. Oh God, Sam. I didn't want this, I said quietly. I spent my life teaching men traits about honor, about trust. I never thought I'd need to spy on my own wife, just to remember what the truth looked like. She reached out across the table, desperate. Please let me explain. I pulled my hand back. You already did, Sam. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed softly, bitterly. You never meant to, Elaine. You brought him into our home, into our bed. You lied to my face and smiled while doing it. She broke, then sobbing into her palms. It just happened. I didn't plan it. I stood pacing the kitchen. People don't fall into affairs the way they trip over a rug. They walk into them step by step, choice by choice. And every step is a lie. I was lonely, she whispered. So was I said. But I stayed. That's the difference. For a while, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. I looked at her, the woman I'd shared a life with, the mother of my children, now a stranger sitting beneath the same roof. Finally, I said, some lines once crossed don't lead back. Her crying stopped just like that. She looked up at me, face blotched with tears, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. So that's it. After everything we've been through, I nodded slowly. That's it. What about the kids? They're grown, I said. They'll understand. Sam, please, she whispered, rising from her chair. We can fix this. I can end it. We can try again. I shook my head. No, Elaine. You ended it the day you chose him over the truth. She took a step toward me, but I backed away. Don't, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. Don't touch me. I won't survive that kindness tonight. I grabbed my keys from the counter, my old jacket from the hook by the door. The air between us was so thick with regret, it was hard to breathe. Where will you go? She asked through her tears. Anywhere but here, I said. I need to remember who I am, without all the lies. I paused at the doorway, one hand on the frame. You know, Elaine, I used to think loyalty was something you proved to other people. But now I realize it's something you owe yourself first. Her sobs followed me down the hall, past the wedding photos, past the memories that no longer belonged to me. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like a blade, cold, clean, and final. I didn't look back. The porch light flickered again, as if the house itself were exhaling. That was the night I stopped being a husband and started being a survivor. Divorce looks cleaner on paper than it feels in real life. The words are neat, typed in black ink, but they don't show the wreckage, the smell of empty rooms, the sound of your own name being divided like property. Elaine filed first. Her lawyer served the papers on a gray Monday morning, the kind of day that already feels like loss before it begins. She wanted half of everything, half the house, half my pension, half the savings I'd built working double shifts and missing every Christmas since the Reagan years. And she wanted spousal support. That word burned. It didn't matter that she was the one who'd cheated. Tennessee law didn't care who broke whose heart, it cared about balance sheets. I remember sitting in my lawyer's office reading the demands. She's asking for alimony, I said. He sighed. She's within her rights, Sam. You've been the higher earner for decades. She'll claim she sacrificed her career for the family. She didn't sacrifice, I muttered. She substituted. Richard's money, it turned out, had been greasing the whole process. He'd paid for her legal fees, probably out of guilt or arrogance or both. The man I once called brother was now financing the dismantling of my life. I told my lawyer, "We'll fight, but not with mud." When the case reached court, the presiding judge was Martha Nolan, a woman I vaguely remembered from civic events, back when I was still in uniform. Late 50s, sharp mind, sharp eyes. The kind who saw straight through exceeds. The first hearing was quiet, tense, but civilized. Elaine sat 2 tables away, head bowed, avoiding my eyes. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a beige suit that made her seem fragile, maybe intentionally so. Her lawyer spoke for her, listing years of emotional neglect, loneliness, financial imbalance. My lawyer leaned in. "You want to respond?" I shook my head. "Not to that." When it was my turn to speak, I stood and said only, "Your Honor, I take responsibility for the times I wasn't present. But absence isn't betrayal. Dishonesty is. And I won't stand here pretending both weigh the same." The courtroom went silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a second. Judge Nolan just looked at me, her expression unreadable, then nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth she couldn't write into law. I didn't curse Elaine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her names. Dignity was all I had left, and I wasn't going to trade it for revenge. Afterward, Elaine approached me in the hallway, eyes red. "Why didn't you tell them what I did?" "Because I don't need to win like that," I said. "Not in public." Her lips trembled. "You're still the better person, aren't you?" "No," I said. "Just the one who still sleeps at night." Weeks passed. Papers piled up. Depositions, asset valuations. My lawyer warned me she'd likely win half the estate anyway. Marriage law didn't care about morality. I told him to let her have it. But fate, it seems, wasn't done teaching lessons. The twist came in the form of a phone call from Evelyn, Elaine's older sister, a woman who never liked me much, but despised Richard even more. "Sam," she said, her voice low, nervous. "I don't know if you'll believe me, but Elaine's in trouble. Real trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that leaves a paper trail." Turns out Richard wasn't just a retired cop with a midlife ego. He'd gone into private contracting after leaving the patrol security work, consulting, and apparently laundering money through shell companies. Evelyn found out that Elaine had been added to one of his joint accounts, supposedly for household expenses. Only that account wasn't for groceries or wine. It was being used to move large sums payments, disguised as consulting fees. Her name, her signature, all over it. I didn't want to believe it, but Evelyn sent copies. Bank transfers, dates, even the notary stamp. Elaine's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was criminal. When I brought it to my lawyer, he nearly fell out of his chair. "If this is real, she's not just your ex-wife. She's a co-conspirator." By the next hearing, the tone in court had shifted like the weather before a storm. Judge Nolan had the documents in hand. Elaine's attorney tried to object, tried to delay, but Nolan's gavel cracked the air like thunder. "Mrs. Carter," she said evenly, "you are hereby ordered to provide a full financial disclosure, effective immediately." Elaine's face went pale. I saw it all in her eyes, the realization that her private sins had finally found their way into daylight. After the session, Nolan called both lawyers to chambers. I waited in the hallway, staring at the state seal above the door. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel angry, just tired. When they emerged, my lawyer pulled me aside. "She's facing an investigation. The division's freezing the joint account. You may not lose the house after all." I nodded slowly. "I don't care about the house." "I figured," he said, "but I thought you'd want to know Richard's under federal review now. Financial Crimes Unit." The irony stung deep. The man who'd once sworn an oath besides fighting me would now face the kind of justice we used to hand out. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, papers spread across the table. Elaine's handwriting stared back at me from a bank form dated 2 months before our separation. Her signature was neat, deliberate, no hesitation. I thought about how betrayal changes shape. It starts in whispers, perfume, hidden texts, and ends in bank statements and subpoenas. My whole life, I'd thought justice was about catching bad guys. But sometimes justice just waits, quietly, until the truth signs its name in ink. I leaned back, the hum of the city outside my window, and couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Turns out, betrayal had receipts. The news broke on a Friday morning, gray skies, drizzle on the window, and Richard Harlan's name flashing across the local news ticker like some cruel punchline to a long, unfunny joke. Former state trooper charged in a multi-state financial fraud investigation. I didn't even flinch. I just poured another cup of coffee and watched. The story unfolded exactly the way Evelyn had warned me it would. Richard's security consulting firm was nothing more than a shell, a front for laundering money from government contracts and private security kickbacks. The paper trail led straight through a web of fake invoices, offshore accounts, and one account that bore Elaine's name. The woman I'd once promised to protect was now part of an indictment I used to write reports about. A week later, I was subpoenaed. When I walked into the courthouse, I felt the eyes of every person I'd ever trained: officers, clerks, deputies. They didn't see a man anymore. They saw a story. The betrayed husband, now a witness in a criminal case. Elaine sat at the defense table, pale, smaller than I remembered. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, but she didn't look up. Across the room, Richard sat, cuffed in a suit that couldn't disguise the stench of arrogance. He caught my eye once, a faint smirk, the same one he used to flash before kicking down a door. Only now the badge was gone, replaced by the hollow pride of a man who thought he'd beaten the system. He hadn't. When the prosecutor called my name, I walked to the stand with the same calm I used to have on the highway after a wreck, the kind where you can't save anyone, but you can still tell the truth about what happened. They asked me about the cameras, about the bank records, about the night I confronted Elaine. I answered plainly. No bitterness, no theatrics. Then the defense attorney tried to bait me. Mr. C. Carter, isn't it true that your actions spying on your wife, recording her, were driven by revenge? I met his gaze. No, sir. They were driven by pain. And by truth. The kind your client wouldn't recognize if it bit him. A few chuckles rippled through the room, but the judge silenced them. Later, they asked if I believed Elaine had knowingly participated in the fraud. I looked over at her, the woman who'd once held my hand through storms, who'd once laughed in my arms under the Ferris wheel lights. She's guilty of poor choices, I said quietly. Not of crime. The courtroom went still. Elaine covered her face, trembling. I could have buried her. I had the chance, and maybe the right, but vengeance wasn't the kind of peace I was after. I wanted closure, not carnage. When the verdict came, the world tilted back toward justice. Richard was convicted on multiple counts: fraud, money laundering, obstruction. 10 years in federal prison minimum. Elaine was spared the same fate. The court found her negligent, but not complicit. Judge Nolan's final words still echo in my head. Mrs. Carter, you are free to go. But freedom without integrity is another kind of sentence. Make your life worth the leniency. Elaine nodded through her tears. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like flies around tragedy. I said nothing. I walked past the microphones, the cameras, the questions. Elaine called my name once softly, almost afraid of the answer. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded. Take care of yourself, Elaine. That was the last thing I ever said to her. Within months, everything she'd built collapsed. The house sold to pay legal fees. Her teaching license revoked. Her reputation shredded in the same small town where she'd once been admired. Her friends stopped calling. Even the book club disbanded quietly. Richard's name was erased from every plaque at the precinct. And mine stayed. Not because I was perfect, but because I survived it with dignity. I kept the apartment downtown, one bedroom, a coffee pot, a framed photo of my kids, and a window that faced the river. That was enough. Sometimes I still pass the old neighborhood. The magnolia tree out front of our former house has grown taller, its branches reaching over the roof, like a memory refusing to die. But I don't stop. I don't need to. I've already buried everything that mattered inside that house. Love, betrayal, forgiveness. Now all I keep is the quiet. And somehow that quiet feels honest. In the end, Elaine lost her home, her name, and the life she'd traded everything for. And I lost nearly everything too. But what I kept was worth more than all of it. A clear conscience, a steady breath. A peace that no courtroom can grant or take away. Because when the smoke cleared, I finally understood something every man learns too late. Sometimes survival isn't about what you win back. It's about what you refuse to lose again. The first night in my new apartment, the silence felt alive. You wouldn't think four walls and a view of the Tennessee River could feel so loud, but they did. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a ghost walking through memories I hadn't yet learned to bury. I slept on a couch I bought secondhand. The air smelled like paint and cardboard. I remember sitting there at 2 a.m., no TV, no noise, just me, and the hum of the fridge, realizing that after 30 years of being half of something, I was now whole and alone. It wasn't all sorrow, though. Loneliness has a strange way of teaching you rhythm again. I started learning to cook real food, not reheated leftovers or quick diner meals. Burned a few pans, ruined a few omelets, but eventually I got the hang of it. Cooking became something like prayer, slow, patient, forgiving. I began keeping a journal. Nothing fancy, just a worn notebook I found in a drawer. Every night I'd write what I couldn't say out loud, memories of cases I'd solved, things I missed about Elaine, things I didn't. The truth is, writing hurt, but it hurt clean. Some days I walked down to the riverbank with a thermos of coffee just to watch the light crawl over the water. People think healing is loud, dramatic, full of declarations and fresh starts. It's not. It's quiet. It's in the way you breathe again, without realizing it. The kids called often. David, my son, checked in from Atlanta where he worked as a firefighter. My daughter Rebecca sent photos of her own little family, her husband, their baby boy, with my eyes. They loved me through the distance, and that was enough. It was early spring when David visited in person for the first time since the trial. He was taller, broader, with that same steel in his jaw I used to see in the mirror years ago. We had dinner, grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, a bottle of cheap wine I pretended to know something about. Afterward, he stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the river. "Mom's not doing too well," he said carefully. I didn't ask. I just waited. "She's living in a trailer now," he continued, "near Oak Ridge. Richard's money's gone. The school board stripped her pension after the investigation. She doesn't really talk to anyone." I set my glass down. For a moment, I could see her face in my mind, the way she used to look when she laughed across the dinner table long before all the lies. Finally, I said, "Life teaches hard lessons." David looked at me, searching for anger that wasn't there. "You don't hate her." I shook my head slowly. "No, I did for a while. But hate's a chain, son. It ties you to the very thing you were trying to walk away from." He nodded, understanding more than his years should allow. That night after he left, I sat by the window long after the city went quiet. The Tennessee River shimmered under the streetlights, soft, steady, unvoiced by the wreckage of human hearts. I thought about Elaine, not the woman she became, but the girl I met at that summer fair, the one who smelled like citrus and sunlight, who believed in forever. I realized something then. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone who wronged you, it's the key you use to unlock your own cage. I took a deep breath and whispered into the empty room, I forgive you, Elaine. No music swelled, no tears came, just peace, thin and fragile, but real. Outside, the river kept moving the same way life does, carrying everything we drop into it, grief, guilt, love, and all the small pieces of who we used to be. And as I watched the reflection of the city drift along the current, I understood something simple and final. Dignity isn't about standing tall when people are watching. It's about how you hold yourself when no one is. That night, for the first time in years, I slept through until morning. The heart attack came on a Wednesday morning. Not the cinematic kind where everything stops and the world fades to black, just a dull pressure in my chest while I was pouring coffee, a tightening that wouldn't let go. I remember gripping the counter thinking it was heartburn. It wasn't. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed at Knoxville General, with a nurse adjusting tubes and machines humming like distant rain. My chest ached, my mouth was dry, and there was a faint smell of antiseptic and lilies, the kind people bring when they're not sure what to say. Mr. Carter, the nurse smiled softly. You gave us a scare. Story of my life, I managed to whisper. They said it was mild. A warning shot, the doctor called it. I'd need medication, rest, and less coffee. I laughed at that last part. 2 days later, as the morning light spilled through the blinds, I heard a knock at the door. When it opened, the last person I ever expected to see stepped inside. Elaine. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Her hair, once auburn and full of life, was streaked silver now. Her face had softened lines etched deep around her eyes. She was thinner, paler. She wore a plain blue sweater and no makeup, just a look that carried both apology and exhaustion. Hi, Sam, she said, her voice small. I didn't speak right away. The years between us filled the room like fog. Finally, I nodded. You look different. She gave a half smile. So do you. Guess time finally caught us both. She sat in the chair beside my bed, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I noticed they trembled slightly. Not from age, something else. Guilt, maybe. Fear. I heard from David, she began. He told me what happened. I had to come. You didn't have to, I said gently. But I appreciate that you did. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor. You were always better than I deserved, she whispered at last. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years I didn't see betrayal. I saw regret. Not the shallow kind people wear for sympathy, but the deep, hollow kind that never leaves. No, I said quietly. Just different than what you wanted. She blinked hard, the corner of her mouth trembling. You make it sound so simple. It usually is, I replied. We just complicate it, trying to be happy in the wrong ways. She gave a soft, painful laugh. I used to think happiness was something you found out there. She gestured vaguely toward the window. Trips, money, attention. But it's not. It's something you grow in silence like you did. I smiled faintly. Took me 60 years to learn that. Elaine reached over, hesitated, then gently placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, fragile. I never stopped caring about you, Sam. Even when I tried to convince myself I had. I didn't pull away. Caring isn't the same as staying. She nodded, tears welling in her tired eyes. I know. For a while we sat in silence again. The years between us seemed to dissolve for a brief, merciful moment. It could have been 1988 again. The fairground lights, her laughter, the summer air filled with promise. But that was long gone. When she finally stood to leave, she looked weaker than when she arrived. Her steps faltered slightly as she reached for the doorframe. "Elaine," I called softly. She turned, and in that instant, I saw at the flicker of something she was trying to hide. Fear. Not just the emotional kind, physical deep in her bones. "You okay?" I asked. She forced a small smile. "Just tired. Been a long drive." But her hand clutched the frame tighter than it should have, and beneath the hospital light, I saw the faint yellow bruising along her wrist, medical tape marks, like from a recent IV. I frowned. "You sure that's all?" She didn't answer, just smiled, that old practiced smile of hers, the one that always said, "I'll tell you later," even when later never came. "I'll come by again," she said softly. "If that's all right." I nodded. "You don't need to ask." When she left the room, felt colder, heavier. I stared at the half-empty chair where she'd sat, the faint trace of her perfume, still lingering, a scent I hadn't smelled in years, but one I'd never forgotten. That night, as I lay awake listening to the distant hum of hospital machinery, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her visit wasn't just about guilt or closure. It felt like a goodbye she wasn't ready to say. And somewhere deep down, I knew Elaine was hiding something far worse than regret. It was 3 weeks after I left the hospital when the call came. I was making coffee decaf against my will when the phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice asked, professional and soft. "This is Dr. Wainwright's office. We have you listed as an emergency contact for Mrs. Elaine Carter." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What happened?" "She's been diagnosed with breast cancer. Early stage, but she'll need surgery and radiation. She asked us to call you." I set the phone down, staring out the window as the Tennessee River shimmered under the gray light. For a long time, I just stood there, hands trembling around the mug. I didn't owe her anything. But maybe that was the point. The next morning, I drove to the clinic in Oak Ridge. Elaine sat in the waiting room, wearing a worn denim jacket, a scarf covering her thin hair, eyes hollow, but calm. When she saw me, she managed a small smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "You were wrong," before I answered quietly. "Figured I'd try to balance the score." She laughed softly, then winced from the pain. It was strange seeing her like that, fragile human, stripped of the armor she used to wear. Over the next few days, I helped her navigate the paperwork, the insurance, the endless calls. She didn't have much left. No savings, no property, no real family besides our kids who visited when they could. But the police insurance plan, the same one she once mocked as the only thing worth staying married for, was still active because she'd never remarried. Funny how life circles back. When I contacted the insurance department, I hit a wall. Her medical coverage was flagged pending investigation for fraud. Something about secondary accounts and suspicious claims. I asked for the report. And there it was, buried in bureaucratic language, Richard Harlan. The man was still haunting her from behind prison walls. He'd apparently used Elaine's name and social security number years ago to funnel money through a private trust, one that the state now suspected was fraudulent. If I didn't clear her record, she'd lose coverage. She wouldn't just be fighting cancer. She'd be fighting bankruptcy. I sat there in my truck outside the county office, staring at the documents, feeling the same cold rage I used to feel at crime scenes. Except this time the victim wasn't a stranger. That night, I went home, pulled out my old police contacts, and started making calls. A few of the guys still owed me favors. I pieced together the paper trail, emails, accounts, a notarized signature Richard had forged years before. I spent 3 nights gathering evidence until my kitchen table looked like a crime board from my patrol days. When I brought the file to the insurance office, the clerk flipped through it, eyes wide. "You did all this yourself?" she asked. I shrugged. Old habits die hard. Within a week, the fraud hold was lifted. Elaine's coverage reinstated, the surgery scheduled. When I told her the news, she just stared at me for a moment, tears filling her eyes. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't," I said softly. "Just get better." She reached for my hand, her grip trembling, but firm. "After everything I did, after everything I said, why would you help me?" I looked at her, really looked. The woman I once loved, the woman who'd broken me, sitting there in the same hospital where I'd nearly died weeks earlier. "Because you needed it," I said simply. "And because helping people is the only part of me I never want to lose." Her lip quivered, and for the first time since I'd known her, Elaine couldn't find words. She just nodded, pressing her hand against her chest, as if holding her heart together. "You're still saving people," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Even me." I smiled faintly, though my throat felt tight. "Guess I don't know how to stop." The next day I sat by her bedside before the surgery. She was half asleep, pale but peaceful. I watched the machines blink softly in the dim light, and I realized something I hadn't before. Redemption doesn't always come wrapped in apologies or confessions. Sometimes it comes disguised as paperwork, signatures, and quiet acts of mercy. Elaine didn't need my forgiveness to survive. She needed my decency. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a man again, not a victim, not a ghost, not an old story people whispered about, but someone who could still choose grace over bitterness. Outside, the sun was setting over the hills, painting the river gold. I closed my eyes, breathed in the sterile air, and thought, maybe this was how healing really worked, not in forgetting what broke you, but in refusing to let it turn you cruel. It's the spring of 2025, and Knoxville wakes slow these days. Mornings roll in soft over the river, carrying that damp smell of pine and earth that only old Southerners seem to love. From my small balcony, I watch the Tennessee shimmer gold under the sunrise and think about how life, no matter how broken, somehow keeps finding ways to be beautiful. I'm 68 now. The badge sits in a drawer, but the habit never left me. I still walk to the precinct 3 afternoons a week, same station I served most of my life, though now they call me Mr. Carter instead of Sergeant. I file reports, mentor rookies, tell stories about back when the radios still crackled. It keeps my mind sharp and my heart steady. Most mornings begin the same way. I brew a strong cup of coffee, real coffee. Now the doctor's warnings be damned, and sit by the window with a notebook. I don't write much anymore, just fragments, a smell, a thought, the way the light hits the water. Peace has a rhythm, and I finally learned to listen to it. My daughter Rebecca visits every other weekend with my granddaughter, little Maddie. She's 6 now, full of laughter and questions that make me forget I'm old. When she climbs into my lap and asks about Grandma Elaine, I tell her she loved stories and wildflowers, and she taught kids how to dream. It's the truth. The rest she doesn't need to know. Not yet. Elaine passed away last winter, December 2024. The cancer came back fast, quiet, and cruel. I wasn't there when she took her last breath, but the kids were. Rebecca called me that night, her voice trembling. She wanted you to know she remembered what you did. A week later, a letter arrived at my door, written in that familiar cursive I hadn't seen in years. The envelope was thin, but it felt heavy somehow. I waited until the house was silent before opening it. "Sam," it began, "if you're reading this, I've already gone where apologies no longer matter, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry for the years I wasted chasing something that was never real, for hurting the one man who loved me without measure. I spent the last few years learning that forgiveness isn't a plea we earn. It's a grace we hope for. Thank you for giving me more grace than I ever deserved. Elaine." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside my journal. Between two blank pages is. There were no tears this time, just a quiet smile, the kind that comes when you realize the pain has finally loosened its grip. I whispered to the empty room, forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. Since then, the days have been kind. I fish on weekends. I volunteer at the community center when they need someone to talk to the kids about choices and consequences. And on Sunday mornings, I walk to the riverside and sit under the same magnolia tree where Elaine and I once picnicked, back when we thought love was unbreakable. I don't resent those memories anymore. They are part of the soil I grew from. Without them, I wouldn't know the weight or worth of peace. Sometimes when the wind picks up across the water, I imagine it's her voice again, softer now, asking the same question she once did long ago at the fair. Do you believe people can change? And I answer quietly, yes, some do. Some finally do. Now, before I close this notebook and pour another cup of coffee, I'll leave you with the same words I've said before, words that have carried me through every heartbreak and homecoming since. If my story reached your heart today, let this old man know where you're listening from. And remember, dignity is the one thing no one can take from you. Then I lean back, watch the river move, and smile to myself. Because the truth is simple, I lost a marriage. I lost time. But I found peace. And that, my friend, is the sweetest victory of all.